Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking through advanced fat loss. I'm joined on the show by my guy Aaron Straker, and we're going to be using his most recent bodybuilding season as kind of a case study, talking through the exact approach and all of the more advanced tactics he used to win his pro card in his second ever bodybuilding show. So you can expect a deep dive into all the advanced tools that already very lean people might use to take their physique to the next level. So think things like protein leveraging, fat burning supplements, carb cycling, and much more. Aaron, welcome back to the show, dude.
Thank you for having me.
Cool.
Cool.
Well, thank you for being here, dude. I think almost everyone who follows us is probably quite familiar with who you are. I really don't like the intros, your backstory thing. So I'm just going to link up kind of your podcast, social media, etc. And let's just skip the intro and get right into discussing these advanced fat loss strategies. So many people, or a very small number of people rather, reach kind of the elite level of leanness that you had on stage. Most people fumble even like when trying to compete and ultimately could have or should have gotten leaner, but can't seem to make it happen. But it seemed like for you it was pretty easy. And plus, as a coach yourself, I know you're incredible at helping others accomplish elite condition. Even, and I think it'll be really cool to also discuss kind of the differences you've noticed going through like an elite level fat loss, both natural and enhanced. It'll be really cool to kind of discuss what changes, what stays the same, and like what theory doesn't necessarily hold up in practice for you. All right, so first, to kind of set the stage, can you give us an overview of what you've been up to this last year? What made you decide to compete?
The past year. So let's talk about let's say October of last year. I was really starting my off-season build again because I had a
Mhm.
hernia in June. So I needed like effectively all of June, July, August, a little bit into September to fully recover from that. So I was really like back into my off-season build, knowing that I would start um, prep in the spring. So, that takes us through like October, November, December, January, February, nothing too exciting there. In March, my prep started. And what made me decide I wanted to compete was a kind of couple reasons. Here in Bali, I had kind of found myself in this environment where everyone around me, almost everyone around me was like bodybuilders. And then there was like me who still did all the same like things, lifestyle of bodybuilding, except literally like posing and getting on stage. Right. So I found myself like very, very embedded in that world without just like the final 8% sort of thing. Like even my wife Jenny had done competing like 8-9 years ago, and I was like kind of the only one. So that definitely like drawed on me. um, and then the ultimate deciding factor was I think I would have regretted it once I got into like my late 40s or 50s, like if I had never done one, because I had spent so much of my, life bodybuilding adjacent. So that's kind of what got me into lifting in high schools. I had all the like magazines, and this is like peak Ronnie Coleman and stuff like that. But it was really just like the discomfort of learning how to pose, being on stage under the lights with like my shirt off, like all those things. Still, like thinking about it just makes my skin crawl because of how uncomfortable I feel doing it. But it was really just not wanting to have that regret later in life.
Okay, okay, I love it. And you are very much someone who already lived that lifestyle, I think more than most bodybuilders do year round. So outside of like the side of things, that could be part of why it seemed, again, from the outside looking in, this was such an easy process for you. So let's walk through your competition prep timeline. First, how many weeks did you spend dieting?
Uh, uh, March 31st was day one, and I finished on September 7th. So I think that's like 25 or 26 weeks.
Okay,
So
okay,
it was quite a long time in
okay,
retrospect, yeah.
okay, okay. So close to about half the year. And then how many shows you competed in and kind of the result that you got for those shows?
Yep. So I did 3 shows. Um, the first show, so the rules are a little bit different with NPC worldwide, depending on the country. So because I live in Southeast Asia, you have to do a regional show before you can do a pro qualifier. So sort of like but I really don't know how NPC USA works entirely, but I'm pretty sure also you have to do like it may not be called a regional, but it's called like a local show, and then depending on your placing, you like qualify for nationals. Like I don't think you can
Mhm.
just rock up at nationals without doing a prior show. That may be incorrect, but that is my current understanding. So my regional was in June 7th in Thailand, and that had to be in one of your there's a clause for like Southeast Asian countries because at the time Indonesia did not have a regional show. They
Okay.
do have one now, and it does also happen to be here in Bali. So that was my regional. I won both of my classes, and then I took second in the overall, which was really a blessing in disguise because I think if I would have won the show, I wouldn't have like I would have maybe got a little bit overconfident or something like that. But losing, being that close to winning and then taking second place, like just dug at me, you know. And I am admittedly, I do get very, very competitive, like in the heat of the moment. Like I'm not a very competitive person, like day to day. But in certain situations like that, like if I'm that close to winning to come up in second place, like it was eating at me. Like I was very, very angry about it. But it really motivated me to get back to work. Whereas I think if
Okay.
I would have won, I don't think that would have happened. So that was show one, my first my first ever show, like ever, and I'm super salty about not winning the entire thing, right? 6 weeks later, I had my pro qualifier in Taiwan. And that is where I won my pro card, which was very, very unexpected. That was a wild, wild weekend. That was show two. And then 7 weeks after Taiwan was my pro show, my pro debut. So the kind of good thing is many big shows are often like there'll be a pro qualifier on like Saturday and then on Sundays like a pro show. So fortunately that my final show, the third show, September 7th in Hong Kong was always in the plan. It was going to be like my second attempt to get a pro card. Well, I didn't
Okay.
need the second attempt, so now I compete in the pro show.
Okay.
Um, which was a whole other, wild whirlwind of things. So going into it, still being like realizing I need a whole new like level of posing because like posing at the pro level is like different than posing at the amateur level, and I had like just kind of scratched, being acceptable of like posing for an amateur show. And now I'm like in a pro show and I'm like, fuck, I'm pretty much starting posing, learning like all over again. I have 6 weeks to get this all, locked in. And then I competed in my pro debut and I took ninth out of 24,
Okay.
which was like my second impossible goal. Like the first impossible goal was like winning a pro card on my first attempt, which I never thought was possible, but you need something to motivate you or else like, why are you going to try?
Yeah.
And then the second, for me, like the peak of my Aaron's like proverbial mountain was like winning the pro card, right? And now I had to like, I was 11 out of 10 happy. And now I have to like try and remotivate myself when I had already like won, what and anything that I had ever pretty much wanted to win. So I set a new like impossible goals. Like I want top 10 at the pro show, which I did not think was possible. And then, lo and behold, I took ninth. So really, really wild.
So the season went quite well. You accomplished both of your impossible goals. We got second first show. We won our pro card second, and then ninth as a pro, which is incredible. What would you estimate your body fat percentage was like when you were absolute leanest? What would you estimate that was?
30%, I think, you know,
Not bad.
there, no, there's definitely like a level to like if you watch like Brandon Kempter is one of my
Yeah.
friends. He's one of the, in my opinion, the best natural bodybuilders in the world. He won his pro card at the day after me at the natural show in Taiwan. There's just like a new level of leanness. Like you can see every fiber of the spinal erectors, the glutes are literally walnut glutes. I think that's like, you're like 3% body fat. And I think I was like five.
Yeah.
Um, where it's just at men's physique, you don't need to be that lean and it may even be detrimental to your placing because the look is not, quote unquote men's physique.
Okay. And then how tall are you and how much did you weigh at the time?
I am 5'11", and at the time for which show?
When you won your pro card, or whenever you were about 5% body fat.
I
Just want
was
to give like some
definitely
context for how lean you really were and how jacked you were as well.
Yep, I was leanest heading into the pro show. So for anyone listening, I put a post up on my Instagram. I guess the date would be around like October 20th, October 19th, something like that. If you guys wanna scroll back of a swipe of all my different like looks throughout my like prep and stuff like that in my course. I don't think I gave body weights, but anyway, heading into the pro show, I was definitely my leanest because I had to be my lightest. Um, so I would say that I was on morning of stage, I was 210.
Okay.
So then I'm probably up like 4-ish pounds, maybe five on stage because I was, the show was late at night. I wasn't on stage until after 10 p.m. So I had to have like a
God,
full day of eating. Yeah, the show was
that's rough.
very poorly organized and ran.
Okay.
It was quite a. It was like the one's like sour spot in of the experience. But yeah, so probably like 4 or 5 pounds higher.
Okay. Okay. Anyways, we were incredibly lean. I think that probably an incredibly small number of people get to 5% body fat or less, let alone with the amount of tissue you had, or get to the point where they're pro bodybuilders. So again, if you don't already know, I think everyone probably already follows Aaron. If you don't, please do, but very well qualified to talk about this topic. So let's give just a little bit more context. Where was your food starting prep? Just right prior to starting the prep, and then where did you end up at the last like week or so before your pro show? Kind of just give us some context there.
Yep. So before prep, right before prep started, and I went back through it and dug all this stuff up. The highest calories got in my off season were 4,600. Protein was like 270, 280 ish. Fats were up to like 75, and then the rest was all carbohydrate. So carbs were pushing, I think, like 650 per day.
Okay.
Um, so 4,600. And I should point out, like, I was absolutely miserable at that level. I was drinking 2 liters of orange juice per day, putting honey on my rice, like all these literally like what would be considered like unhealthy actions because that's what it needed to continue to for my body weight to increase. Um, and then the lowest food got heading into in the final 3 weeks before my pro show, we had a lot of weight to move to get under my weight cap, so we had to like get aggressive, right? And the lowest there was protein was about 320, carbs at their lowest were 250 on my sorry 200 on my non-training days, and fats were around 45. So I think that's like 2,500-ish calories.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So you dropped about 2,100 calories from the highest to the lowest. It doesn't sound like you had to dig like did that hurt pretty bad or like for you did it feel like you were digging?
that
Okay.
hurt very
Okay.
bad. Yeah.
Okay.
The final I had a 2 week period where, post Taiwan, we're like, okay, we got to drop food down a little bit. The gear needs to come down a little bit because we're just too big, and my body was just not responding. I stayed at like 227 for like 3 weeks straight. And then Jackson, my coach, was like, unfortunately, like you need to be a real person, and like you're gonna have to experience what everyone else experiences. So we started chopping food down, and it wasn't until we got around there where my body really started moving. And then I also got sick right at that time, so that was just a very unfun period. But it was only about like 2 weeks. But I made a note here at 3 weeks out from the pro show, I was 227 pounds. My weight cap was 216.9 that I had to get under. So I was like literally 10 pounds over.
Wow.
Um, 2 weeks later, so in 2 weeks, I went from 227 to 212. In those two
God.
weeks, sucked.
I would
Sucked.
imagine so. Yes. That sounds awful.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, on paper, 2,600 calories, 2,500 calories does not look like a small amount. And it really isn't, but it's all relative. Like I was going hypo on those days. Um, which was really interesting. And that's with, no insulin or anything else there. But yeah, when your body is ripping through carbohydrate, like 200 is not a lot. And training was horrible and stuff. I felt really, really poorly.
It is really interesting to see with clients as well. Like you might have someone at an intake sometimes where it's like, oh man, this would hurt. I feel bad for putting you here. And like, oh no, I'm fine. And same thing like on the way up, some people like even like maintaining or building, where it's like, man, this is a lower maintenance intake than I would want to hang out at, but this person like feels great here. We perform fine. It is really interesting how much variability there is. But as you said, it seems to be just so relative.
Relative is the really the best way to put it.
So I know a few years ago, if I'm correct, you did, I know you went through a long building phase and then a fat loss phase right before you started TRT, and you got absolutely diced for that. So we have a pretty cool comparison of you getting like absolutely peeled prior to using like any PEDs, TRT, anything like that. And then you once again getting absolutely peeled with drugs in place. What would you say were the key differences you noticed going through this process with like being enhanced versus doing it naturally?
I mean, a lot of it's really the same. You know, like the structure of food is pretty similar. The protein is higher
Hmm.
being enhanced because your protein turnover and nitrogen retention is higher. Um, and what's really ironic there is, have you ever been like in the calorie deficit when your protein is higher, and like at the end of the day, like you have more protein to eat and you like really just don't want any more protein?
Yeah, a
Fuck, I'm
few
so
times.
over like the chicken breast. That was not my experience. Like there was a point where the only diet ask I asked of my coach was like my final meal was like a whey shake, or it's supposed to be casein, but I can't do casein because I'm lactose intolerant. But I really just wanted like more chicken breast. And I was like, can I replace this with chicken breast? And he was like, yeah, you can. And my final meal was just like another 100 and I think 50 grams of chicken breast. And I like really wanted that and enjoyed it. And there's always that kind of like joke that people say in a diet, like if you say you're hungry but you won't eat more chicken breast, like you're not hungry, you're bored. No, I wanted more chicken breast. So that what I thought was very very interesting from an actual like desire standpoint. But the things that change are obviously total caloric intake. Your body weight is higher, so you need more. Training perform the preservation of training performance when being enhanced really changes things up through in those final 3 weeks before my pro show. Things got training performance absolutely fell off a cliff. It got abysmal. But even through Taiwan, like in peak week, heading into my pro card win, I was still setting PRs, literally, in peak week. So training performance can just keep kind of progressing there if you play your cards right. And what I mean by that is if you're willing to sacrifice where you place your carbohydrate, you can still get a lot of training performance. So like, intra workout carbs, liquid carbs stayed in, up until the very, very, very end. But then I would have no carbs or rice or potatoes or whatever, anything with dinner, because it was an opportunity cost that we could place those closer to training to preserve training performance, glycogen restoration, those sorts of things. So if you're willing to sacrifice for the sake of performance, like you really can do a lot still. Um, Cardio, I needed to do less, so I didn't do any real cardio in this prep. It was only just walking, and I literally walked around. We have like a here in the villa, the living room and kitchen is all kind of connected, and it's like a bigger space. So I would just walk laps between like the kitchen and living room for 40 minutes in the morning, 40 minutes at night, and like that was my quote unquote cardio. Um, yeah, I didn't do any like hunger management, drugs or anything like that. Like I didn't do any of the GLPs or anything. But it's easier, like make no mistake. I always make this joke, like the drugs are cheating, especially if you've done things like naturally for a long time and then you do it, with the drugs, like it is easier objectively.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I'll say like my experiences being on testosterone, it's been from a building perspective, like I haven't pushed to the level you have in like as far as like trying to get peeled, but it is pretty crazy what a difference that has made in my ability to build. So cool. Okay, very, very interesting. I think that's a really nice segue into a lot of the strategies I actually wanted to dig into. Let's actually start talking on protein leveraging, basically leveraging a higher protein intake and fat loss. This is something you kind of touched on in terms of needing more protein in place when you are enhanced due to higher protein turnover. You said your protein was at 270 to 280, correct?
In prep it went over 300, like 300
Okay.
to 330,
Okay.
320, sorry.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, you'll often hear that protein should be pretty high in a fat loss phase due to the satiety benefits. We have a higher thermic effect of food, which means protein specifically burning the most calories during digestion. Potentially harder to store as body fat than other macronutrients. And also, more protein potentially means we're less likely to lose muscle. Is this something with clients, like leveraging up a higher protein intake and fat loss specifically? Is this something you do? Like, what's your take on this?
Yeah. So I mean, we'll speak about it in terms of like your physique athlete clients. And I don't even
Mhm.
by physique athlete, I don't even mean people who are competing, just the person who wants like the really good, lean beach physique sort of thing.
Yeah,
So we're not talking about like getting someone from like unhealthy to healthy from a body fat percentage standpoint.
right.
I think so because it's really opportunity cost is the best way to look at it, right? We know and let's assume everyone's natural, right? Muscle preservation in a calorie deficit is the number one goal, right? Well, the number one goal is fat loss, but number two goals is muscle preservation, and a higher protein intake is muscle sparing, right? Especially if someone's doing like higher intensity training sessions, longer training sessions, training earlier in the day as opposed to like relative later in the day when glycogen stores will be lower. It's just safer, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, and then for like the person who's like just trying to get healthy, right? If we are, let's call it, overweight or something like that. If we're overweight, we have some level of insulin resistance, right? Very rarely do you get an overweight client and look at their lab work and like HbA1c is at like a 4.7 and fasting insulin's low and those sorts of things because these are like the body fat accumulation past a certain point is a um, like a result of these metabolic things that like shift negatively over time. So why would we give that person more carbohydrate when they're less likely to partition it in a favorable way? Right? We have two other options: protein or dietary fat. If I were to make a blanketed statement, which I typically do not like making, most people, let's call it any across the American spectrum, eat way more dietary fat than they need. Okay. So why would we give them more of something that they're probably already over consuming? And then we only have one other option left. You know what I mean? It's protein. And the protein it helps us in achievement of the goal. We get greater satiety, right? We get the thermic effect of feeding, which helps very small from an energy expenditure standpoint, and its opportunity cost on where else those calories could go that would provide us a least favorable outcome for the desired result that we're looking for.
Very well put. So, how do you determine when we're leveraging our protein intake up the top end of what's actually beneficial? Like, when does more protein kind of stop mattering or even become counterproductive because those calories could be better spent on carbs, for example? How do you
Yeah,
determine that point?
it's very rare that I take someone over like 1.25 body weight multiplier.
Okay.
And that's in pounds. I forget exactly what it is in kilos. Um, and it depends on the person's really schedule and training intensity, right? If it's someone who's like training really, really hard, 5 times per week, and they train like earlier in the day, maybe only after one meal, I'm going to leverage, and because they train after one meal because of their schedule, because of like work demands, family demands, those sorts of things. I am going to leverage, I'm going to try and leverage higher carbohydrate because it's going to benefit us from a training performance standpoint. And then I monitor and see, is this impacting like negatively our rate of loss
Hmm.
in our fat loss phase? Like everything that I do, I always try and be, results or outcome dependent. And if it's impacting that, we start to shift over. Is hunger getting like really, really high? Are we running into issues where they are leveraging poorer food choices because they have so much carbohydrate to spend? Right. That's like one of the things. Like if you only get 180 grams of carbs or something like that in the day, you're probably not having like pancakes and those sorts of things. But if you have like 300, 350, you start to get a little bit less choosy in where those get appropriately distributed. And obviously that has inherent impacts on satiety and those sorts of things. So those are like the kind of the three facets: training time, rate of loss, schedule or family, um, prerequisites that would impact that, and then how intelligent or unintelligent a client is with their food selection.
Okay. Okay. Now to bring it back to your intake needing to be higher when you're enhanced, has your intake, like you ate quite high protein prior to being on testosterone as well, correct? Like has your number actually changed much?
Yeah, it is higher. It's one of those things like that, and being full transparency, this isn't something that I feel like super strongly confident in saying like, yes, it needs to be this way.
This
It
is the
may
clip I'm
be,
putting on Instagram, so I'm
yeah,
just
yeah,
kidding.
of course, yeah. Every single coach I've ever had has ran the protein like higher
Hmm.
than what the research recommends, and it's
Yeah,
one of those
same.
things where there's two sides of it, right? It's either one coach at some point made this bro lore and everyone just follows it, right? And to being incorrect, right? We're all just incorrectly doing it because someone started it at one point and no one's deviated from it. It's like that's a very possible situation. The other situation is all the research is not done on the population that's representative of the type of athlete that everyone is putting high protein on. So it's like pick your poison. I don't feel super confident one way or another, but I do know like in fat loss, if we put the protein lower and put all that additional protein over to carbohydrate, that will only slow your rate of loss. And in fat loss, it's not like how often are we speaking to like with a client in fat loss? And fat loss is so easy and seamless, and they're not hungry, and the weight's just falling off, and they're like accidentally getting shredded. That doesn't happen. So it's like it's the I'm gonna err on the side of like caution or what is the most likely outcome, and pushing that carbohydrate over to protein typically produces more favorable outcomes and smoother fat loss with increased satiety. So it's probably why we do it. Um, but then again, there are clients who are super active and they're just ripping through carbohydrate. So you give them more and we run a lower protein. That's just a much less likely scenario that we see in practice.
And I think there's very few situations where we would actually take protein, like what either of us I would actually consider low. Lower maybe relative to like our carbohydrate intake, but probably still I would imagine we're around a gram per pound of body weight if we're talking about like a pretty fit population.
Yeah, the only I would say like the only time I could think going like under that is if someone had like really bad digestive issues or like doesn't do whey and is like a vegetarian or something like that, and we have like really limited options, and like there's only so much seitan you can eat every single day before it's kind of obnoxious. So, but that would be like very extenuating circumstance sort of things.
Okay. Good segue into talking about carb and fat intake then. How did you personally determine kind of your carb and fat intake needs during this phase?
I
Like
mean,
how
I
we're
didn't do it.
biasing,
My coach did it.
or kind of talk us through the thought process behind that, how you approached it rather.
Yeah. So, in terms of what foods I chose, or just the total targets.
Just like, hey, I bias like a pretty balanced carb to fat ratio. I bias a lot of carbs and relatively low fat. What was that like?
Okay. Yeah. So the when I have assuming we have a healthy, individual, insulin sensitive, not overweight, that sort of thing, like high carb, lower fat is objectively a better approach for both physique and sport performance. Right? There's people step one of like your macro calculator says split your carbs and fats like how you want. That is you can do that. It's better to go with higher carbohydrate, assuming you're insulin sensitive and those sorts of things.
Okay. Okay. And you hear a lot of talk about, and I don't know, I think it's a lot more like marketed to a lot more gen pop. Like, hey, I'm just kind of getting into this. Like, hey, your calories and protein really are all that matter.
Mm.
I don't ever see that playing out nearly as well in practice as when, and I don't know if it, I think a big part of it is, of course, like People are just more dialed in and taking the process more seriously as a whole when we're like, hey, we're hitting all these targets, but you are going to be able to fuel your training so much better. We're going to be recovering better. I also think that with just like, hey, just calories and protein, people typically get more flexible. Kind of like you were talking about before, if we like allocate more of your protein or if we allocate more of your calories to protein so you aren't like filling your carbs with pancakes. Kind of the same thing here. I find that people just have give themselves way more leeway than they should, but we can just ensure we're so much better fueled. Like I fully agree. Now, when you are talking like someone who's on TRT, for example, we're taking in exogenous hormones. So, like a lot of our fat intake, when people talk about like fat intake needs, a lot of times the thought process is, well, we need adequate fats to support like sex hormones and things of that nature. When you are working with someone or like you yourself, now that you're on like testosterone and whatnot, are you like okay with dropping fat intake lower because we don't need to support those processes nearly as much?
Yeah. So the objective answer is yes, I am okay with that because one of our primary functions of dietary fat intake, it just gets like side loaded via exogenous, hormone
Mhm.
replacement therapy. The other primary function is like you need some basic level of like dietary fat intake for cell structure integrity of our
Mhm.
cells. Um, but that's quite low actually, and what I find is like, let's say that threshold for fat intake for supporting like cell membrane structures, let's just say it's like 30 grams of fat per day, right? Put your protein at like 225 grams of carb, or sorry, 225 grams per day, and try and get your fats under 30. I mean, if you're doing like a bunch of protein shakes, you can do it, but unless you're eating like shrimp and white fish, just like chicken breast will pretty much get you above that 30 grams per day. So we kind of run into this like optimal on paper versus like a real world practicality. Whereas, like, if you're eating not white fish and shrimp and egg whites only, your protein intake is going to, or sorry, your fat intake, I apologize, is going to rise above that 30 grams per day threshold. So in a calorie deficit, like if we need to really start cutting corners, like I will bring protein down to like 40 in a male on TRT or someone who is enhanced. I feel very, safe for that cell structure base coverage. And of course, I'm putting like 4 grams of EPA and DHA for of fish oil um, in, but it really becomes almost impractical for a longer duration. And then the difference with like my natural males, I'll still go to like 50 pretty much. Again, it's opportunity cost. I think 50 is more than um, adequate for covering the synthesis of pregnenolone. And I look back over my coaching career one time in my 7 years of full-time coaching, right? But let's say I started looking at labs maybe like year two. One person one male had fat intake so low that cholesterol was crushed across the board. One person. So I think it's one of those things where like we speak about these things in theory, and the theory is true, but in practice, few people can eat such low fat for so long that it's actually under that threshold of what's needed for hormone production, and we see the results of that.
Okay. Okay. My last fat loss phase, the last like 3 weeks, we went to just trace fats. So no added fats, basically just the fats you would get from like a chicken breast, for example. I think I am typically was ending up at like 24 grams a day. That was interesting. I like it was fine. Mentally, I noticed I was quite a lot foggier there. Talking to Dom about that, a mentor of ours, his take was it's probably related to omega-3 intake to a degree as well. And I did like put more emphasis on that, and that did seem to help quite a bit. But just an interesting aside. So you can touch on like fat intake levels for men. The general advice is that women will typically need a higher fat intake than men to maintain healthy sex hormones in a fat loss phase. Do you find that is something actually holds up?
Yeah, the reality of it is, and please for the women out there, I'm speaking objectively, not in my opinion. Women are just less resilient in fat loss, and that's purely a physiologic function of biology and the role that men versus women play, right? If you look through history in famines, men die at a disproportionately higher rate than women during periods of famine. Um, Now, the reason, that they need the fats higher is because of that physiologic difference, right? So I rarely, and it's always like body weight kind of size, right? If you're a larger person, typically you keep things higher. Women, on average, are just smaller than men, but I would say like I very rarely will take a woman under 40 grams of fat. Maybe like 38 if they're like a really small person and we're getting like really lean. But 40 is typically that like basement that I like to set, and then I'll just get a little bit more what's the word I want to use here, like thrifty with my carbohydrate modulation and calorie carb cycling and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, all dependent on the size as well. Like I feel like I've had a weird amount of clients who are like 95 to 105 pounds, just like tiny, like 4'10", 4'11" individuals. And it is very interesting to have the conversations around, but I heard you're not supposed to eat less than like 1,500 calories. And it's like, you're also like a miniature person and your needs are so much less. So it's always an interesting conversation, but okay, interesting. If we are getting extremely lean, we're getting to the point where we are pushing our fat intake close to the bottom range of where we want to be. Are there specific fat sources that you really try to bias?
Yeah, I mean, omega-3 fish oils, and by that, what I mean is like what I'm really care about is I want like 3 to 4 grams of EPA DHA content. So if you are, a listener unfamiliar with that, look at the back of your fish oil bottle, and if it says it's 1,200 milligrams on the front, like how much of that is actual EPA and DHA on the back? Oftentimes it's like 300 of that 1,200 is what you actually need. So buy a different product with a more appropriate dosing.
So many shitty fish oils out there. That's so important.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So that's one I always use. Walnuts are another one that I will use. Brazil nuts for the selenium. Walnuts are also higher in omega-3. Avocado I will use. If someone wants to do eggs and they like that, I will always try and keep at least one egg in with the egg
Same.
whites. Pure egg whites on their own are just like, don't get me wrong, I love eggs. I eat egg whites every single day, but just egg whites alone, it's kind of sad, eating it as opposed to like egg whites plus one egg. Even if we need to go down to like a medium sized egg and we're really trying to like shave off, I would much rather that and then pull from somewhere else. But those are my big go tos. I try and build some level of like enjoyment in as well. So if we can fit some dark chocolate in, at a later point of the day as a nice kind of just like afternoon treat or post dinner, you know, small bit of joy in a fat loss phase, I will also like to leverage that. Those are my biggest go-to sources. And then obviously once we have more fats and stuff to work with, like I do obviously find benefit in putting in leaner cuts of beef. Very rarely ever will I do like fattier cuts of beef because it's really just the opportunity cost on the saturated fats.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very, very similar there. I really, really like the vertical diet approach for the most part when it like hey, we kind of as a framework for or a kind of a skeleton for the diet in terms of if we tick these boxes, we're gonna do a pretty good job with like most of our micronutrient needs, our basic like, hey, let's make sure we have our omegas, like if we can work in an egg consistently, like a serving of Greek yogurt if the person does well with it. In terms of carbs, any specific sources you like to prioritize there if we're deep in fat loss?
Potatoes, winter squash, if it's available. Um, I mean, it really depends. Like if you're deep in fat loss and hunger is an issue, which it typically is, like we need to start playing the volume game a little bit. And one thing that I will kind of say is once rice gets to be like less than like 125 grams like cooked in a meal, I don't really see the point in leaving it in anymore
Little
because it's a
quarter
pretty
size portion, yeah.
it's a pathetic amount of rice. So once we're there, I'm always going to push that to, sweet potato, red skin potato, purple potato, one of the various, potatoes. or even preferentially like winter squash varieties, so like your acorn squash, Kubota squash, butternut squash, spaghetti squash, delicata squash, like that whole family of winter squashes. You can eat a pretty disgustingly large amount of winter squash for like 25 grams of carbs. So it's great for satiety. What are some other ones that I like to use? Like oats will come in instead of like cream of rice, or something that I started doing in my prep that I really liked is I would do an oats and cream of rice combo, and then it just got you like a little bit more voluminous of the cream of rice, and then it also gets you a little bit more fiber, which as you know, total carbs come down, like it gets harder to get your fiber at a sufficient threshold, and then you might start having a bowel movement like every other day as opposed to every day because like fiber's coming low. So the combination of pushing some like cream of rice over to a combination of cream and rice and oats is a positive uptick in fiber, as is bringing in the potatoes. If you're going to eat the skin, you get a pretty nice bump in fiber as well, and that might be the difference between us having bowel movements daily still, right? And obviously when you're having bowel movements daily as opposed to every other day, you're getting a much more kind of linear and non fluctuating um, scale reading.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. No, very, very similar here. I like the bias. I mean, if I was going to build like a meal plan for someone who's pushing fat loss quite hard, typically we're probably going to have in the first meal like oats and maybe like a berry, like a raspberry, good amount of fiber if we're wanting to make sure fiber's still in a decent place. Potatoes for sure for a meal. If someone's like really digging, it's like, hey, we need to maximize satiety. Potatoes are just such a satiating food. It might be multiple meals that are chicken breast, potato, and a veggie, and it's not supposed to be exciting. It's gonna be quite bland, and honestly, that really helps us make the diet more satiating, right? Versus us just trying to prioritize our tasty foods. And I really do like the squash, the spaghetti squash for, or like any of the variations you mentioned for a lot of volume. So that's eerily similar to a lot of diets I feel like I built.
I think if you've spent enough time doing this and you really try and get to being like really um, useful, right? And you keep your options open. You don't subscribe to any like diet camps or whatever. Everyone ultimately ends up finding the same answer, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like if I always like to use like finances and investing as a an example or an analogy with nutrition, because the parallels are so good, right? So if you're like, hey, I really want to like save money for the future and be have a retirement and stuff, but I don't want to be a trader in all of these things. Like, what do I do? Everyone eventually finds the answer of like you buy the S&P 500 index, and over time it just works, right? Whereas like if you were only like 6 months into it or something like that, or pretty new, you're okay, I need to be in like these tech stocks or something. But then over time, everyone ultimately ends up like finding the same answer if you spend enough time like evaluating all the different options and stuff.
Very wise. Okay. Let's talk calorie or let's talk carb cycling then. Calorie slash carb cycling. You put them in the same camp.
Yeah.
First, is this something you did? Did you have just a linear intake daily? Did they vary from like training day, rest day? Talk us through your setup there.
Eventually they did. So in the beginning, we just kept things as simple as possible, right?
Okay.
Because you want to, and that's exactly what I do with clients, because oftentimes everyone wants to get fancy, everyone wants to get advanced. But what's really kind of funny is the most advanced people who could get away with the biggest advanced strategies like the simplest approaches. Like everything that I did in prep was so stupidly simple. It would People probably wouldn't believe it. So the only difference until we needed to get fancy to make the weight cap, I ate the same thing every single day, the same calories. The only difference was on my non-training days, I didn't get intra-workout carbs. That
Okay.
was my calorie cycling. So
Very,
50
very
less
similar there.
grams of carbs because I wasn't drinking a liter of coconut water on my non-lifting days.
Okay. Okay. So is like a calorie cycling approach something you use with clients often or not so much?
I will once if they are consistent enough to be able to handle it, right?
Hmm.
Because let's be honest, I would say 50% of clients, you give them the same carbs, protein, and fat, 7 out of 7 days, they can't even be consistent enough at that. So why would I throw a variable in there? Why would I put like a step 2 variable when they can't be consistent at step 1? Because then we're just going to be even less consistent because we have more moving pieces. So I mean, adherence, as much as I hate to say it, like it is such a massive variable that needs to be able to be controlled, or giving you additional options is only going to exacerbate the issue that's already in play.
Absolutely. That's a mistake I've made a lot of times in the past is like honestly with like a low high, like a train day, rest day type approach. I'm excited about it, especially like when a client's starting initially. Hey, I'm gonna start you on this approach. It's gonna be sick. And like they're excited about it, but also it's like, hey, and we didn't hit our targets a single day this week. Okay, maybe we need to back this up. I will almost always start someone on these days on, hey, we're just gonna do like a linear intake to start. Let's get you consistent, and then we can add more over time.
One thing I'll add there quickly that this happened to me multiple times is then if you do that approach, you have to be very explicit with the client because, like, for a long and still even to this day, like I offer nutrition only for certain clients if they want to do their own training or whatever. But
Mhm.
something I've run into multiple times is the clients be like, "Oh well, I don't want to have to eat the low day carb, so I just added an extra training." No, you're bending the rules to defeat the
It's
purpose. So they would like go in
incredible.
and do extra training that then only impacts they're like the training they're supposed to be doing, like just because they want to eat more. And I'm like, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're shooting yourself in both feet because you're increasing your total weekly calories and you're not going to be recovering aptly between your training sessions, which impacts your later performances. So that one I've run into multiple times.
I will say, like, I use calorie cycling with a lot of people as we get deeper into it. Like, I find, like, I really, even in fat loss, just not having a linear intake. And I do appreciate that, like, hey, we're good with just like nailing the same daily. But especially for like a lot more female clients where that intake, I find that with women specifically, I use it a lot more where like that intake, because women typically are going to be smaller individuals, caloric needs are going to be much lower that like if we're eating like 1600, 1500 calories a day versus us having like 4 days a week that are quite a lot higher on our training and then 3 days where we're digging quite a lot more, even if our net deficit is the same, just easier to adhere to. Are there other like physiological benefits that it's baited? I've seen in theory it seems like using calorie cycling with people who are otherwise are more sticky for whatever reason seems like people move along quicker, but I don't have anything outside of an anecdote to like prove that.
I would agree, and I think it's one of those things where on paper there is no benefit, right?
Mhm.
If we were to set up like a study, right, where all meals were provided, et cetera, I would agree. I don't think there is a benefit. The benefit, which when it comes to dieting and stuff, that is a very it's like a wild card, is managing human psychology. The human psychology aspect of it is absolutely gigantic. So it's like you can be like pretty hungry 2 out of 7 days per week, and they're like each separated by like a 3 day period of minimal hunger, or you can be like moderately hungry 7 out of 7 days per week, giving like taking okay it's just okay like Monday, if it's Saturday and I know like hey Monday's going to be my hungry day, like you can kind of mentally prepare for that, and then hey Monday's like I'm pretty hungry, it's not the most fun, but tomorrow it gets better, right? That's a little from a psychological standpoint, you can conceptualize it and justify it a little bit better, and then that drives a longer a better adherence. Whereas if every day it's just like every day I'm at like a 6.5 out of 10 hunger, it's never going to get better. There is no end in sight. You're much more likely to have like deviations and those sorts of things. So it's one of those like on paper or in a lab, there is no benefit. But when you plug in the human psychology, it completely changes because you're changing adherence.
Absolutely. No, that's been my exact experience with it as well. All right, let's talk fat loss support, supplements, peptides, PEDs, etc. First, from your perspective, if you're okay to talk about it, did you
Mm-hmm.
personally use anything beyond, like when we're talking about fat loss support, when we're like your clenbuterols, things like that, any like fat loss agents you used there?
Clenbuterol, yes. Injectable L-carnitine, also yes. But that was kind of in already.
Hmm.
So I can't really say if I noticed an increase from the injectable L-carnitine. I mean, I'm not. I'm saying I can't confidently say in either direction. The clenbuterol works. There's no denying it.
You
Um,
feel that pretty quickly.
I mean, you see it.
Yeah.
It's yeah. You see the heart rate. You get I got like a modest heart rate increase. I am fortunate where I'm pretty like even keel all the time.
Hmm.
Like even caffeine. The only way I know I had too much caffeine is I can't sleep at night. But I don't
Okay.
get that like super buzzed up caffeine feeling. It's just like 10 p.m. and I'm like, oh no, it's gonna be a rough night of sleep, sort of thing.
Okay.
So even with that, I didn't like the first couple days. I could feel like I was like a little bit more like uppity, but then by like day 4, I felt perfectly the same. My heart rate would just be elevated, but nothing what I felt was made me feel uncomfortable or anything like that. The cramping, I had to be more intentional with like my taurine and sodium intake because clenbuterol, you'll kind of like rip through things a little bit faster, and there can be some induced cramping. And that's pretty much what I ran. Just that. At the very end, I put in MOTS C, but I can't really say I noticed much of a difference. Although again, I'm a pretty poor person to ask because it's hard for me to feel difference in things. Um, but I can't confidently say that like, yeah, this was a game changer for me. But clenbuterol definitely does work objectively.
Okay. The injectable L-carnitine, talk us through that. That is something I have used in the past, and talk us through kind of what it is and the thought process as far as supporting fat loss.
Yeah, so I mean, carnitine is just an amino acid.
Right.
Um, and from my understanding of it, it's kind of like a rate limiter in some processes. So by increasing the amount of carnitine substrate, we can transport more fat into like the mitochondria to be
Hmm.
oxidized for energy. And then the reason you have to inject it is because the oral form is so poorly bioavailable, and the quantities you would need to take orally to reach like a threshold of effectiveness has another negative side effect. I forget exactly what it is, but it can like one part of it converts to something, and I think you get like smelly or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. Do you know what that is?
I don't recall, honestly. I'm not
Yeah,
familiar.
it's something like there's like some downstream conversion. Like if you take enough oral L-carnitine to where it would actually be like effective, there's another negative side effect of something it like converts to. Um, but I would say the injectable L-carnitine is not fun. You're pretty much putting a milliliter in. Has to be intramuscular per day. In some of them they kind of like sting going in. It's not fun. It's by far my least favorite thing to do. I would say if you are like evaluating different things, it would be not my first choice for fat loss, definitely.
Yeah, and it's as you said, it's an amino acid. It's not like a PED. It's quite easy to
Hmm.
get. That was like before I started TRT or anything. Like I had messed around with it because there was hype a couple years ago. There was a lot of hype around it. It just fucking sucks to inject
It
yourself with it every
sucks.
day. It does burn, and I don't know if I would like if someone was like, should I use it or should I not? Personally, it's like I don't know if I ever. It's hard to quantify, but I don't know if I ever saw any difference from it.
It's a good deterrent if you're, should I get into PED? Should I not? Yeah, start with L-carnitine, and then you'll be like, dude, fuck this. uh, Ironically, it does have some pretty decent support for fertility, and now that
Okay.
that's my new goal, I have to stay on it for like the next 4 months, which is another not fun thing. But
Good stuff. Okay, let's
yeah,
then in terms of fat loss support, supplements, peptides, etc. Let's go through some overrated, underrated, or appropriately rated. Starting off with yohimbine. What's your take there?
appropriate, I would say. Very, very modest. It is natty slash legal for some, kind of interesting context, but mileage varies depending on your personality, right? If you're someone who's a little bit like prone anxiety or a little bit more like high run, you're probably going to feel fucking miserable on it. If you're someone like me, I felt nothing at all. So, and I even went to like, I ran it at 20 megs per day, right? That's like zero point 0.1 milligrams
Uh,
per kilogram.
okay.
Felt perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I went through two different sources as well, just to kind of cross my T's and dot my I's if one of them was like bunk, which would be a very strange thing to fake because it's like a legal supplement. Um, but yeah, I would say appropriate, but could be terrible, depending on your personality.
Yeah, Yohimbe is a really interesting one. I personally, I hate how it makes me feel. I am that like very high strung, anxiety prone person, and like 5 milligrams of Yohimbine, I feel awful the next couple hours, just so jittery and so anxious. Alpha Yohimbine, a little bit better. Dosing there a little bit different, however. It's a very interesting one. Basically, what is it? The alpha receptors. I wish I was smarter so I could have this conversation with you better. But basically, it
Um,
helps us liberate fat from otherwise stubborn fat cells easier.
yes. Yeah.
So it's
I
very interesting. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
one of the things I think we should add is it's not really going to be effective until you're already kind of lean. So
Okay.
if you're like, hey, I'm starting my fat loss, let's call it like I'm an 18% body fat male, I would not be touching Yohimbine. And Yohimbine is like I'm at 12% and I want to get leaner. I would say probably 12% is the like, fattest. I'm using air quotes here of someone that I would be putting that in with. Um, that's a body fat percentage for a male. For a woman, that's at about 8% to that, so maybe like 20% for a female, which again is already pretty lean or
Yeah.
decently lean for lifestyle. Before I would incorporate that.
I think another important caveat there, correct me if I'm wrong, but yohimbine, its primary benefit is basically shutting off these, again, alpha receptors that prevent us from getting the fatty acid out of these otherwise stubborn cells. But we need a reason to actually burn said fatty acids. So, like, typically we're using yohimbine with like a cardio, for example. So, if we're just like popping yohimbine to push our fat loss along quicker, we're not like, hey, pairing this with activity to actually burn those fatty acids. They're just going to go back into the cell and we're not actually going to get a whole lot of benefits from it. So it's not something that we're just going to like take by itself to promote fat loss.
Exactly, and it needs to be in a in low insulin environment. So pretty much the only time that you can use it effectively is if you're doing fasted cardio in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
because it needs a certain number of time after a carbohydrate intake and before a carbohydrate intake, and then it can also negatively impact sleep. So if you're taking it like at 3 p.m. where you have this like 4 hour window, you may be, negatively impacting your sleep quality and sleep latency. And I would not take yohimbine at the cost of sleep. I think sleep is going to be much more productive than yohimbine.
I would agree. Okay, next up, ephedrine.
I have zero experience with this actually.
Okay.
Um, it's kind of, I know you can kind of get it in like some cough medicine sort of stuff, but when I was natural still, it was not. When I was natural, I was like natural, like, yeah, I used yohimbine in one diet. I didn't use it at the time I got super lean though, out here, just like caffeine effectively. Um, I've never used it. I don't have any clients that use it. And if I don't have any like direct experience with something, I will be very, very hesitant. Um, I will not recommend it to any client. If some client comes to me and like, hey, I have this and I want to do this, like, what are your thoughts? I'll say, I have zero direct experience. I won't say absolutely no, but I'm very transparent about my understandings and lack of understandings on things. I do know it's effective, but I just have zero experience, and I know sourcing it is interesting in this day and age.
Yeah. I have a buddy who absolutely loves ephedrine, who's a coach himself, and he'd always like, dude, you can just like go to Walgreens and tell them like you have a coffee and you need whatever. I don't remember what it is.
Bronchade.
Yes, the Bronchade. And I was, for some reason, that just sketched me out. I was like, I don't know. He once when he was here visiting, he's like just loving the ephedrine. But no, I personally don't really have experience with it either, so I can't speak to it. My understanding is Probably like yohimbine-esque in its effects. Nothing crazy. It's pretty similar to just like taking a larger dose of caffeine.
It does.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it does seem like the industry is slowly kind of moving away from more like stimulant based fat burners to more of the like newer peptide age things. How much lasting staying power there is in that, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know in 5 years if we're still going to be talking about, MOTS-C in SLU PP332 and I do not know where it was like 5 years ago. Clenbuterol was clenbuterol, right? 5 years ago, yohimbine was yohimbine. I don't know. It does seem to be that way, but it's all from opinions from people. And if there's one thing that I would say that is bad about our industry is you get a lot of like very, very strongly opinionated people that can be just literally 100% incorrect, which is wild. And I hope that I never come off that way. I try and I very rarely speak in absolutes. I try and say when I'm not incredibly confident about something, but you'll get people that are like, this is the absolute game changer. Nothing is as effective as this. And then 18 months later, something comes out that it's literally a fucking paperweight. So yeah.
It is good marketing for a short period of time, I think, to speak in absolutes, but no, I appreciate that about you, dude, and I don't think that you need to worry about being that person. Next up,
Great.
we have like our retatrutide, tirzepatide, basically our GLP agonist, and of course with your retatrutide and tirzepatide a little bit more alongside that. Overrated, underrated, what's your take on those?
I think they're appropriately rated. I do think of anything that is actually, really effective. Those are the things. I think they do become a crutch for a lot of people, and now I think their like use cases are being kind of bastardized a little bit. I have two clients that they are working wonderfully for. The clients that I have seen that work wonderfully for is like we have people who unfortunately have like, I'm going to use the quote, like slower metabolisms, whereas like they need lower calories relative to their like stature and body weight to move the needle than you would anticipate or expect that they need. And what you pretty much get is a linear correlation with an increase in hunger. So like for them, dieting is literally harder. Well, on the
Right.
opposite end of the spectrum, you have someone like me. I have a low appetite, like relative to like my size and stuff. So like for me, dieting has never been like that hard. And I have a lower interest in like food and stuff in general. So I think for those people who, genetically dieting is harder because they enjoy food more, they have a higher psychological food focus coupled with like a slower metabolic rate or maybe a worse, natural thyroid function. Retatrutide can be wonderful because it allows us to eat the level of calories that we need to eat to produce the fat loss without them like white knuckling fat loss, trying to hold on because they're so fucking hungry and their food focus is so high. So I think like that is wonderfully appropriate. Um, I think a lot of the stuff where people are like, "Oh, you should you can bulk on retatrutide and it does this and that and that." I'm like, I don't. I'm skeptical that something that's so effective in dieting because it slows digestion and reduces food focus and stuff and increases energy expenditure is somehow also magically positive for the complete opposite of all three of those situations I just described. So I think context is incredibly important.
Yeah, I know. I believe there it's, hey, we're gonna get with like the retatrutide, the insulin sensitivity much improved, right? Like we can, but so I had a couple months ago, it seemed like there was retatrutide really blew up. It was like I was seeing so much about it, and I had so many clients ask me about it. Several clients who were like, "Hey, I'm interested in starting this. What do you think?" And I was like, "I feel like I can't speak to it well." Something I tried it for a month just because I wasn't in fat loss. I was in a building phase. It was just I have so many people who are like interested in this. I have a few clients who are starting this. I want to be able to like speak to this a little bit more and understand this a little bit more. It was really interesting. Again, I was in a building phase, and as you said, like after like that 3 to 4 weeks, I was like, I mean, I just don't have any desire to eat my food. Like this isn't productive for what I'm trying to do at the moment. It was a really interesting experience though, because truly it is like this would make, from my perspective, being on like, I think the highest I did was 1.5 milligrams per week, which I think in this, I don't remember, I think they started either 2 or 4 milligrams per week in the studies. But it was like, it was insane how much it impacts hunger, but as much as anything, like your desire for food. And it was like, I can see how this would make fat loss incredibly easy, but it's also really interesting how it impacts your reward pathways. Like, and it's find like the clients who I've worked with who have like taken it. It seems like everyone's like how it impacts their mental is a little different. For me, it was like I get the appeal of it. I don't know if I would use it though in fat loss again because I almost feel like it like wouldn't be as rewarding, if that makes sense. Like to me, it felt like it was like a lot. It kind of dampened the reward of a lot of things. And again, I think that's different for everyone. Like the clients who like can think of like one client very similar to what you described, where dude is just like has to absolutely grind. He's dialed in and just has to absolutely grind on such low calories to be any progress, and that's just how it's been for him, and it's been so incredibly helpful. But I don't know. It is an interesting one. I'm interested to see like how the next couple of years play out in terms of like fat loss coaching with all these things in place. I do think a lot of people will find where there's some individuals where it's truly very beneficial, and then some where it's like maybe this isn't the move, even if it would make it a lot easier for us. I'm kind of torn on that.
I think it's contextual, right? Like in full transparency, I'm on it right now. One, to establish my own understanding and personal
Hmm.
opinions. But then two, I'm on the back end of contest prep where
Yeah,
hunger usually like skyrockets and stuff. And I will say like my food focus is probably the highest it's ever been in my entire life.
interesting.
Minus the end of like prep, sort of thing.
Right.
Um, so I think it has contextual uses that have like inherent benefits, that are more appropriate, less appropriate. So like that's one I think is good. I don't think putting it in the beginning of a fat loss phase is good because it's like one of the sharpest tools that we have, now. If you use it right away, it's going to be dull when you really fucking need it, So when prep, or not prep, but like diet gets hard and food is low, like you want to be able to put it in then, so we have this additional adjunct to carry us through like the deepest waters. And then obviously you're in your default population, which is like your obese people, right? And like you said, it does rewire, pathways and stuff, and or at least temporarily while it's in play. And when we have people who have like such an emotional food attachment or something like that, and making those changes so challenging for them, it can be wonderful because that might be the difference between like getting them, off the track, the high speed train to like diabetes or not. So I think it's all contextual, but let's say you're not that obese person. I would not be like, hey, I'm starting my diet on Monday. I'm going to put in retatrutide. I would put it in at like the 80% or something like that to get you across the finish line, or to further extend how lean you may otherwise be able to get before a lot of those things are not worth it anymore because of the trade-offs necessary.
It is a very interesting one. Again, I feel like I'm definitely not in the camp of like I think there's a certain demographic of coaches who are very much against like any of the peptides and whatnot. Like I'm fascinated by it. I think it's sick. I think all this stuff is super cool. Still just like kind of trying to feel out like that's something that makes sense versus where it's not. And again, I think that also varies a lot by person. Okay, so next up, we kind of touched on clenbuterol already. Of course, this is going to be, I guess this and our retatrutide. Retatrutide, I don't know if this is hard to get, but clenbuterol, of course, is going to be in our PEDs category. Sounds like from your take that is appropriately rated, works quite well. Okay, okay, fair enough. Anything else to add there before we move on?
Um, no, I mean, there's obviously all the other like the mitochondrial function upregulators and stuff, but there's like 4 or 5 of them, and it may. I wouldn't feel confident giving a rating, so I would rather just be transparent that my rating would probably not be a good representative of it.
Okay. Okay. SLUPP332 is one that comes up quite a lot as well. I know you mentioned that, and that's one very much the jury's still out on as well. Um, I use a small dose of that in my last fat loss phase. It's a peptide. It's not a peptide. I don't know what category that falls into, but it is a
Research chemical.
mitochondrial for research purposes only. It is a mitochondrial upregulator, basically. Uh, Anecdotally, I felt like it helped fat loss move along a bit. Hard to say though, because there are again a lot of other variables in play. Um, it's one that again I feel like there was a lot of hype around for quite a while. Don't hear, and I might be just in a different circle. I don't feel like you hear quite as much about it anymore. Again, and I feel like a lot of these the jury is still out on, and it's not as much of like a proven commodity as like your retatrutide or any of the other things we talked about.
Yeah, the only thing, and I'm this one isn't directly, it's similar, but I just saw something actually yesterday that SS31. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just got FDA approval.
Oh really? Crazy.
Yeah, like I saw that literally last night. So
That's
I
about to be a
didn't
lot
have like
harder for people
much.
to get.
Yeah, interesting things are gonna go around. But I think like if that's happening, it gives it like a legitimacy of sorts, um, depending on your personal relationship with like FDA and, legal, not legal, et cetera, et cetera. But that one I was kind of interested, surprised to see.
Okay. Okay. Huh. That's cool. I had no idea. All right. Anything else there before we move on?
I don't think so.
Cool. We're getting pretty long here already. Do you have just a few more minutes?
Of
Cool.
course.
All right, dude. Let's just chat about training quickly. Um, I want to kind of scan over a lot we've already talked through and just talk about this new approach you're taking with your training to kind of wrap things up here. So, I know you've recently chatted about kind of this new low volume approach you're taking post show. I believe it's low volume, high progression priority is what you called it, correct?
Yep.
Okay, walk us through that. Kind of what made you decide to run this approach?
Yep. So the first factor in the decision making is like my goals have shifted, right? My priority is restoring fertility and starting a family. So with that, part of my like health, progression is like I need to start doing more cardio. I because I got to talk about I did zero real cardio in my prep. I just walked.
Mm.
I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I was shredded to the bone. I can't say I was actually in good shape. I just looked like I was in good shape. Um, so I wanted to do more cardio and prioritize that, and I wanted to just reduce the amount of time spent at the gym. Like towards the end of prep, like I was just there so long. You kind of start to it did feel like a job, like I did not want to go train. I did not want to go to the gym. So I wanted to like scale back on that in prioritization of these other things in my life. So pretty much training every other day, and then like there's a cardio day. Or what I ended up doing was I wanted Sundays. I wanted to not have to go on Sundays, so I end up doing a training session and a cardio session on Saturday. Um, I wanted to pull volume back because again, I just didn't want to be there that long, and because of this shift in goals, but then also I'm already over my weight cap. In the IFBB Pro League, like it was hard for us to make my weight cap. I can't do this like big off-season growth phase or whatever. I mean, sure I could, but then I have an even harder diet. Like I don't if I need to be on stage at under 200 or weigh in at under 217 pounds, what good does it make me to be 240 pounds? It doesn't. That's just a miserable fucking diet. So I'm like, okay, I know I can keep my body weight, and I wanted to test it. Can I keep my body weight right around like 220 to 224 on TRT and like 2 to 3 units of growth hormone? Can I do that? Yes, I can. Okay. Is that going to, and if I'm really intelligent with training and really just trying to focus on micro progressions, adding a rep in reducing volume, can I improve the area that I need to improve the most, which is like my upper back, with this approach? I'm not sure, but I have like literally 18 months to test it. I'm going to test it. So that's why. And I've always been like a moderate to high volume lifter myself. So it's a little bit of me like being my own, like playing devil's advocate on myself and testing a new approach and saying like, hey, if I'm really just focusing on one perfect execution, which should be easier to do because I'm not going to have nearly the amount of fatigue because I'm doing like 7 working sets in a session instead of like 12 to 15 or something. And I progress that, like, is that enough to move the needle and like accrue tissue where I want it and maintain tissue in other places? I can't say confidently yes right now, but I intend to find out.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like our main focus is we're generally doing like one set per movement, and the goal is to progress as often as possible.
Yeah, every session I want another rep or 2 reps, and then I'm working in like tighter rep. Like I'm not doing anything that's like 10 to 20 reps, right? I'm doing like a 6 to 9 or a 7 to 11 or
Nice.
something like that, like a 10 to 12. And then, in 3 weeks, I should have another 2% on the bar and go through that cycle again.
Okay. Okay. Now, when you're only doing one set for a body part, what's your ramping up to that or the prep for that set look like to make sure we can get the most out of it? Something I'm talking about constantly with clients is like, yo, are we doing our warm up sets? Like, how are we preparing for this? I imagine you're not just cool. First movement is dumbbell chest press. Let's rip it. And just right as soon as we hit the gym, like, what's that like?
Yeah, so normally I'm doing two, like for example, in a given, so I have my splits upper and lower. So in my
Mhm.
upper session, I'm doing 2 chest, 2 back, right?
Okay.
And then like lower, I'm doing like a leg extension and a squat pattern or a lunge. So I'm typically hitting like two for like, let's call it, knee up and then like shoulders in sort of thing.
Okay.
That admittedly is something that I actually talked about on my podcast with Brian this past week. It's like I have to find. I'm still like greasing my groove, but first exercise for a body part each day, I need 3 warm-ups. Um, and that's another one of the things. Like as you get stronger, you need more warm-ups because like joint integrity risk increases as the stronger you are, and you just need to ramp up to perform. Like using that example, like let's say it's a dumbbell press and it's my first exercise of the day, and let's say I'm using like 55 or 60 kilos, which is I don't know, it's like 120 pounds or something like that. I can't just like grab the 100s and do a warm up and then go into it. Like my shoulders, I would dislocate both my fucking shoulders. So it is a bit time consuming. And what's ironic is I have not drastically cut down the time of time spent in the gym because of my warm-ups.
Okay.
Um, but I'm still like figuring that out a little bit. So I think I need three first exercise of a major body part, and then I'm gonna start testing like two and then one. Obviously, like I do whatever, like a lateral delt, like exercise four. I'm gonna take one and go into it, but that's something where I've been a little bit more uh doing a little bit over warming up just to from a safety standpoint right now.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, backs had me running quite low volume, a lot of just like one set per movement for quite a while. And I found the same, like my first like compound movement for a body part, I would typically like the hack squat. I for sure need at least three warm up sets for that. But even
Yeah.
like in a press or maybe less so like a pulling movement, but typically like most of our more taxing compounds, like three warm up sets, typically like maybe let's say like 6 to 8 reps with about 50% of my working weight, 3 to 4 with like 75% ish. And then I do really like to just, I mean, prep your nervous system for it around like 90 to 100%, even like maybe one rep on my working weight, rest a couple of minutes, and then get into it. I think that that can be like a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but it took me a while to kind of refine like, okay, do I need, because for a while I was like, I'm going to do that for everything. Three warm up sets before I get into it. And it's like, that's a little bit overkill, I think. So that like, where does this actually like finding the point of efficiency and also making sure you can get the most out of it? I'm interested to hear how that kind of evolves for you over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will, but it's like I'm only running. I'm in like some of the sessions I haven't even ran twice yet. So
Okay.
I'd imagine once I've like run each of my sessions like 3 times, I'll be like, okay, I don't need this anymore, or the movements now. I have my neuromuscular efficiency improvements and stuff, and I know like my settings and everything, or so it will get more efficient as I go.
I'll have to have you on again in the future and talk about this a little bit more when you have like more takeaways from that. Cool, dude. All
Yeah,
right. This
sure.
has been a great conversation, man. I appreciate all the time. Let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Before I let you go, anything that you want to plug?
You can always find me on Instagram at Aaron_Straker. That would be the most place I'm most active. I have started a YouTube channel and I have been trying to get a little bit more things out there. So some of my competing and stuff is on there and like very respectable vlogs, right? Around like the 12 to 15 minute mark, which was one of the things I wanted to be cognizant of. Um, I have a gym here in Bali. It's called Undefeated. So if you're ever in the island of the gods, please come get some training sessions in. And then I host a weekly podcast with our friend Brian Borstein called Eat, Train, Prosper that you can find on YouTube and all of the streaming platforms.
Incredible. I will link all that up in the show notes. Again, dude, thank you so much for being here, and we will catch you guys next time.